Hello and welcome back to the Lady K podcast. I'm Katy Mckinney with Lafayette Academy. I'm the founder and the head of school there. And today I thought we'd talk a little bit about some of the frequently asked questions that parents ask us who are touring our school, because classical education is very different. It's not something you're going to find just across the street, and it has a huge rise right now. It has seen a sort of a resurgence in our country over the last decade or so, but there's still a lot of questions about it when parents encounter it for the first time. So I thought today we would talk a little bit about some of those questions and give you some of the results as to what we're seeing with classical education. In previous podcasts, I've talked a little bit about my own journey. I didn't know anything about classical. I didn't even know it existed, as much as 15, 20 years ago. And it wasn't until I homeschooled my own children that I accidentally fell into it. It began with the reading of Cultural Literacy by E.D. Hirsch. That began to open my eyes. What is this thing called cultural literacy? It's this shared language that we have within Americans. You might also hear it called the Paideia. And it's basically those intangibles that make Americans Americans, or that make the French, or the Germans, the Germans. It's just things within your culture that are just passed on from generation to generation. But what we're finding is that some of those intangibles have probably for the last, I would guess, 80 years or so have not been transferred. And so that's why we're seeing such a crisis in education today, is my belief. And so classical education is really trying to resurrect some of those really important cultural aspects that enable us to have our republic, that were the seeds of our republic, and that we do need to see the propagation of so that we can maintain that. So in any case, the questions that parents ask are legitimate questions because they haven't come in contact with classical education before. So one of the questions we get is, if you walk into our school, in fact, I had a tour yesterday, and the woman asked, "So you have no computers in the classroom?" I said, "We do not have computers in the classroom." Now, I will say that with a little caveat, because in our upper school classes, they will pull out computers if they're writing a paper, if they're doing research, specifically our seniors who are writing their senior thesis, which takes between 1 to 2 semesters to do the research and then put the paper together, which they then verbally defend against our faculty in the spring. So yes, there are times when we do use computers, but it's very, very few, and it's in a much, I guess, controlled atmosphere. We bring them out, we do our work, we put the computers away, and it's only for one period. And then again, that's just in the upper school classes. Otherwise, it's paper to pencil. And so parents coming in will say, why would you choose paper and pencil when computers seem to be all the rage and our kids need to have those computer skills? Well, it's interesting. I was doing some research and looking at others who've done deep dives into the results of computer versus pencil, paper and pencil, I should say. And it's showing consistently that students are learning, thinking, and remembering better when they use paper to pencil than if they use a computer. I've been told too that in my adult life, as I'm in a seminar, I'm taking notes, and oftentimes I can take notes a lot faster on a computer. However, I am not. What's happening is I'm taking sometimes word for word, transcribing the speaker and putting them in my notes. When that's okay, that's fine. I can go back to it. However, a higher level of taking notes would be as if I did write paper to pencil, which I often do too. If I don't have my computer, I'm always taking notes at seminars. But what that requires us to do is we cannot, unless you know shorthand, you cannot take notes, written notes, as fast as you can typed. So that requires us to kind of go into a higher echelon of thinking and listening to the speaker, pulling out the main concepts, the big ideas, and jotting those down. That is a higher level of thinking when you're handwriting those notes than if I were typing them. Hence, why we ask our students to then use paper and pencil in the classrooms when they are in a lectured-styled classroom or even a Socratic-based, Q&A discussion. We ask them to do their notes, paper to pencil. So research is showing that the learning, the thinking, and the remembering is much deeper. It's much better when we're using paper and handwriting them. It also, interestingly enough, happens when our students are reading real books than reading off of a computer. It shows that reading comprehension is much higher, and that is verified by a number of different resources that we have here. And interestingly enough, it found that when we are reading from paper consistently, and this is over 54 different studies and surveying over 171,000 students, that they found that reading from a book consistently, you will outperform your peers when it comes to comprehension. It is with great prudence that we are asking our students to read from books and using paper to pencil when it comes to note-taking. So that is obviously grounded in very strong evidence. Another question we get from parents is, aren't computers essential for preparing our students to operate in the real world? And of course, our students need to know how to use technology. And I would say, even though we don't even have computers in the classroom, our kids are way beyond, right? Adults, 4 and 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds can oftentimes outperform their parents. So they're not suffering in the way of learning tech by not having it at school. And what we're working on, though, are the foundational skills in the classroom. That's where our focus is. And that sense of deep reading, the logical thinking, the clear writing, that is going to build more effective skills than doing it through a computer. Little side note, I was talking with one of our newer students who is in 8th grade, and he is 3 years behind in math, just came to us from public school. Maybe I said that already. And interestingly enough, he flat out told me, he said, Mrs. McKinney, it's extremely easy to cheat on computers. And he goes, I did it all the time. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, specifically in math. Oh, and let me back up. I asked him, I said, hey, there's a gap. We both know there's a gap and we're working hard to shore that gap up. And I said, it seems like, I was kind of working, how and when did this happen? I said, when did you get a computer in your hand for school? And he said, at the end of 4th grade, we were given computers in public school and we were allowed to keep them over the summer. And he said it was so super easy in math in particular to cheat. And what they would do is they would have 2 screens toggled up and they would have 2 websites. And he said, even though they put blockers on these different websites, he's like, we all know how to get past those. So they would do the problem on one website and then cut and copy and paste the answer onto the sheet that was, for the teacher, for the school. And he said, we did it all the time. I said, do you see how that has hindered you now? And he's like, yeah, it's, I'm 3 years behind. I said, yes. And though, the cheating obviously was your responsibility, it was your fault. However, it was also the school's responsibility to ensure that that didn't happen. Obviously, that didn't happen. And so now we're paying the price for you to catch up. And part of the detriment to him is that he has not had the opportunity to exercise that mental discipline, learning his math facts, for example, learning how to do long division, long multiplication, understanding the how and the why behind it, because the computer was doing all that work for him. All that to say, at our school, we literally write out, in math in particular, we say, show your work. We want to basically show your thinking so that we can see where and if, problems arise. We can pinpoint that much more easily, and it makes it much more efficient to master that or to find the correct answer and master the skill that we're teaching in mathematics. Unfortunately, when these kids have computers, they are not learning what's happening. Basically, when you pull the curtain open and pull the curtain back, the students are not seeing what's happening. Another quick side note, we had another student who came to us from public school. She was here last year in 7th grade, continuing with us, and she was 3 or 4 years behind. And we had her do long division and long multiplication for the first time. And she was looking at it, and she's like, this is what I've been doing on the computer the whole time? And we're like, yeah, that's what you've been doing. She's like, this is awesome. She was so thrilled to learn and know the thinking behind the problem. And she has taken off. She has done approximately 3, maybe 4 years of math in about 18 months. She is flying and she is loving math. And I think, wow, because before she really wasn't enjoying math. She didn't understand it and she was way behind. In any case, it's been a lovely, beautiful awakening for her by putting paper to pencil. It never would have happened if she had done, stuck with the computer. Okay, So back to the question at hand. Are computers essential for teaching our students how to operate in the modern world? Of course they are. But if we don't take the time to put paper to pencil first, to establish the deep thinking, the logical reasoning, the clear writing ahead of time, we are missing a huge opportunity for our students to develop that skill within themselves. And shouldn't every human being have the opportunity to think? That is what we're here to do. We're here to think, to know, to discern, and that is being taken away when we just plop them on computers. So students who master these traditional skills of thinking deeply and reading and comprehending, it allows them actually to be more capable digital learners in the future. Another question we get is, doesn't the digital learning make children more efficient? Wouldn't we want them to be faster, better, brighter in that way? Doesn't technology do that? And I would say, yes, digital can feel faster. And there are tools, of course, AI, ChatGPT, those things. They can help in a great way make things faster. But research is showing us that students who are reading or working on screens tend to skim the reading. They tend to understand less of what they're reading. The comprehension goes down. They retain less, and they overestimate their own comprehension. That all impacts their learning in a very significant way. And so efficiency, while it can be valuable in some areas, I would say it's only valuable when it leads to real comprehension. And so we have to first develop those skills that we've talked about before, reading from real books, using paper to pencil, developing those skills, then allow them to work. And frankly, the efficiency will be even better. ChatGPT is great. However, you have to know the right questions to ask. You have to know the right parameters to give it. You have to have some guardrails in order for it to produce what you're interested in having it produce. And that only comes from having prior knowledge and understanding the right questions, good questions to ask. And good questions are hard to do. Especially in a classical school, we're talking all the time about asking level 3 questions versus level 1. And briefly, let me give you a quick example. Let's say we're teaching about the Civil War. A level 1 question would be, when did the Civil War take place? Okay, easy. Who was involved in the Civil War? Easy. When it comes to, what if the South had won the Civil War? How would that make our world, our nation look different? Well, now you have to amass a ton of content knowledge to be able to intelligently answer that question. That's a level 3 question. Those are the kind of questions we want our students to be able to ask if they are going to be using, high-level tech tools in the future. They won't be able to ask those questions if they don't have any knowledge. And right now, computers is definitely hijacking that opportunity for them when they're introduced at a very young age. Another question that we get is, how does, when you're reading on screens versus reading on paper, how does that affect test scores? Does it affect test scores? And interestingly enough, a research paper, Mangden, if I am saying that correctly, in 2013, found that 10th graders reading the same texts scored, I guess, on paper and on a screen. Those who read it on paper scored significantly higher on the test than when they read from the paper, from the book, versus then reading it from a screen. All going back to the idea that when you're reading it on a screen, you oftentimes will skim it, you understand less, you retain less. So that was interesting. And then in another research paper from Delgado in 2018, it confirmed that reading from paper, having it consistently in front of them, especially for academic tests and timed conditions, also increased test scores. So that's interesting that paper is supporting deeper reading, sustained attention, better recall. When we are giving our students time tests, which we do multiple times a month, we do it through a program called McCall-Krabs. It's always through paper, and it's the old-fashioned bubble answers, in a bubble test, and that truly is supporting their advancement in reading. This is after they become fluent, of course. Even when we're introducing reading, when we're teaching reading at the kindergarten level, by January, February, our kids are literally taking books home every day, and they're reading them at night and bring them back. And that, again, too, is increasing their reading comprehension and their reading fluency. But we do that all the way through senior year. Interestingly, handwriting is not being taught really anymore in the public schools. I know that for a fact. When my son was in second grade, I was asking the teacher, because having previously homeschooled him, we would do handwriting every day. I put him in public school for 1 year as I was building the school that I opened, Lafayette. I had him and his other siblings in public school just to give me the time to, because I couldn't homeschool that year. I had to focus on the school. Anyway, I asked the teacher, are you teaching handwriting? And she looked at me with kind of a desperate look and said, we don't have time to teach handwriting. And I'm thinking, in second grade, how do you not have time? That's like one of the major priorities in second grade. She goes, no, we don't have time. The curriculum is dictated to us. Literally, they're reading some of it verbatim from a notebook. It was it was just awful. In any case, for her as well as for the kids, I will say. But they didn't have time. I said, can I come in? Can I help teach the handwriting? She's like, if you would, that would be amazing. So for 3 weeks, I came in. I sat on a hard tile floor, and I'd pull little groups of 3 or 4 kids at a time. And I think I even made them, or I bought them myself, little manuscript, little like books. So, and the kids who needed practice in just manuscript, I worked on that. There were others who were excited and wanted to start cursive. We started that, but it was paper to pencil, and she was so grateful. But then I have people asking, handwriting is not being taught. Why is that important? Well, there is tons of research. There's a paper, Mueller and Oppenheimer from 2014, that discusses that handwriting absolutely strengthens memory. That is a neurological scientific fact, that when students are handwriting something down, they memorize it much better. They retain it. Their conceptual understanding increases with teaching handwriting. The note-taking quality, we already talked about that. That increases. Again, you can't take word for word notes when you're listening to a speaker. You have to go into a higher echelon of thinking, and that is getting the main idea and writing that down. So your note-taking quality increases dramatically, and their organization and executive functioning skills also increase greatly, because they're working and learning how to organize information, taking the big idea, taking the subpoints, what are those, and pulling that all together. So handwriting supports all of that. And in the Mueller and Oppenheimer research from 2014, it says that students who take notes by hand perform much better on conceptual test questions than those who are on laptops. So handwriting definitely encourages a much deeper processing, which of course we want. And if it's beautiful, that's another huge bonus, which we teach explicit handwriting in kindergarten, first and second. I had one parent whose daughter joined us, I believe it was in first grade. Her handwriting was atrocious, but the parent didn't know any better. They just thought, well, that's a kindergarten. That's what it looks like a kindergarten could and should do. She comes to our school. She starts being taught explicit handwriting, and it starts to become beautiful. And she takes her work home, and her mom said she looked at it and she just started to cry, because she didn't realize what her child was capable of, and felt that her child had not been, obviously, that side of her child had not been tapped into. And so that was a lovely discovery to know that was sitting there waiting, just dormant. And once it was fed and once it was nurtured, boom, this beauty just came pouring out. Another great story, our 6th grade student who came to us last year, who had been in public school all these years, his manuscript, even still, it's I will say, by the time they're in 6th grade, it's very difficult to teach manuscript at that point. Their habits are fairly well embedded. And so we do the best we can, but we did have the opportunity. There was a clean slate when it came to cursive. So we worked diligently on his manuscript. It's okay. It's not great. We just don't have enough time. We've got other things we have to shore up, but we did teach him cursive. His cursive is gorgeous. And when you look at his manuscript, you think, oh my gosh, there's hardly any hope for his handwriting. But then he turns out this beautiful cursive, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like you wouldn't guess it was coming out of him. It's beautiful. So there is hope. If your child hasn't learned cursive yet and they're a little bit on the older side, take advantage of that opportunity, because that handwriting will strengthen those things we mentioned: their memory, their conceptualization, their understanding, their note-taking quality, and of course their organization as they're taking those notes. It'll improve all of that. So let's just talk about, there's more we could say about all of this, but I want to share with you just some of the results of why we don't do the computers and why we do the handwriting. And In the fall, we do what's called NWEA testing. This is a test it's a standardized assessment. It's provided to over 50,000 schools nationwide and over 16 million students. We prioritize academic and character education. We do not prioritize testing. When we have testing, which we do the standardized testing 2 to 3 times a year, we don't really tell our kids it's coming until about a day or two before. We say, make sure you get a good rest, good breakfast, come well rested, and we give them the test. It is on a computer. So in any case, all that to say, the results when we've been doing this testing, we had a feeling our kids were doing well. We just didn't know how well. That was back in 2023 when we really started this gung-ho. And interestingly enough, and I'll show you the graph here, it turns out that we are leading the way in both reading and in mathematics, not just locally, but also nationwide. And what it gave us the assurance of is that we are preparing our kids, the next generation, as to how to critically think, how to problem solve, how to learn, how to organize, how to comprehend. And like I said, we never teach to the test, but we just allow the test to reveal the excellence that we're teaching. So let me give you just some data here. In math, particularly, Missouri that year in 2023 was performing proficiency across the state was at 35% in mathematics. Our local school districts here, we have the Wentzville School District, the Francis Howell, and the Fort Zumwalt School Districts. Big districts. They were performing Wentzville at 44% that year, Francis Howell's at 53%, and Fort Zumwalt was at 54%. This is proficiency in mathematics. Our students were performing at 72%, much higher than our peers. And then in reading, Missouri in 2023 was at 45%. And then respectively, Wentzville was at 52, Francis Howell at 63, Fort Zumwalt at 60. Our students were at 88%. Again, all the public schools and statewide, so many of our kids, the majority are on computers, especially in the public schools. Our kids are not using any computers in the classroom, and yet they're far outperforming their peers on these standardized tests. So then I said, okay, that's great. Great that we're outperforming public schools. That's fine. What about us compared with private or charter schools statewide? Where do we stand on that? And you'll see here on the graph that in math, the proficiency, and it's on the left-hand side is kindergarten, and then as you go across the bar here on the right, the horizontal axis, it goes up to 10th grade. The navy blue bars are our students performing in mathematics, and then the light blue bars are those students in, again, private and charter schools, which, again, are supposed to be doing well. They're doing probably better than public schools, but not much. I would say the majority of our private schools are glorified public schools. And it's not me just saying that. I have parents saying that. Parents who are at some of these private schools are saying that they're just glorified public schools. Okay, all that to say, these blue bars are indicating in every single grade, we are far outperforming every private and public school in the state of Missouri. And I would say that are taking the NWEA. We compared apples to apples, so that's what we know. The other thing here is in reading, our students are far outperforming, again, private and charter schools statewide. So that, again, that was in 2023. Let's fast forward. We just took the NWEA again in the fall. And what we're finding is that now that we have enough data, we are now pulling information of those students who've been within a classical educational environment, our school, for the last 18 months or longer. We are comparing them with the other students out there. Students who have been at our school 18 months or longer are far outperforming the students who have been there obviously less. And the longer they are in a classical environment or at our school, the better and better and better are they performing on the standardized tests. So that was very exciting and encouraging to see that indeed that the students who are with us 18 months or longer, and we've got students who've been with us 4, 5, 6, 7 years now, They are far outperforming, new students who are coming in, of course, but they continue to usurp their own knowledge, their own test scores, and continue to rise, which is very exciting. Again, all without computers. It's all paper to pencil and real books and annotating in those real books. It's just a great pleasure. So if you are homeschooling, or if you are in a school that is supportive of those methods, I would say hooray for you, hooray for your child. You're doing an exceptional job giving them the best of the best. If they are in a spot where they have computers, I would think twice. I would see what you could do about making a switch for your child's benefit, long-term benefit. It will, in the end, just allow them to flourish and become the better version of themselves if they have that opportunity to exercise all those wonderful skills that are just waiting to be nurtured. And I hope this has been helpful. Have a great day.